Let's not mistake a mediocre character arc as a feature of a story, especially if it's going to take up an inordinate amount of production time and imposing on you every chance it gets. If it's gonna be such a focus, it should be a lot better. So there's a growing issue I've been noticing as I partake in fandom discourse, one I've actually noticed for years, but I've never been able to put my finger on until recently. See, I was chatting with a friend about the Owl House, and I brought up how obnoxious it is that Hunter continues to hog up screen time while never doing anything. And that friend countered that Hunter actually has a lot of potential in being an abuse victim who acts as a barometer for Belos' evil. To which I replied, yeah, sure he has potential, but every character has potential. Sylvanas had potential, I wouldn't praise the writers for failing to realize it. And like that, it was like a light went off in my head and I knew exactly what it was that had been bothering me for so long. So the disconnect between work and fan work has been getting quite blurred in the last few years. Personally, I blame the propagation of theory YouTube, as they're effectively fanfiction but presented as if they could be canon if the story went in a given way, but 90% of the time they never do because the writer would have had to have been slamming barbiturates to not immediately throw most theories in the fire. But most media today is written with fandom in mind. The theories, the headcanons, and the general vibe of collective freaking out has become part of the experience. I even saw one person stating that the real problem with For the Future getting leaked wasn't the sheer ineptitude at Apple leading it to happen, but that a new episode is supposed to be an event. I don't care for this approach. I mean, I haven't cared for it since Steven Universe. Don't worry, we won't be here long. Look at the chapters. See, one problem Steven Universe had is that the show itself had very little content, and the context for damn near everything was buried in over 1,000 interviews, live streams, and Twitter posts. Effectively meaning that the experience of someone just watching it on TV and the experience of someone immersed deep in the fandom lore are vastly different because plot holes are explained in the interviews, character relationships are completely recontextualized, we learn the very obvious villain redemption wasn't a real redemption because, let me check my notes here, they weren't explicitly verbally forgiven by some random guy who isn't one of their victims, and it's also how we learn that the gems experience gender the same way the Asari do. Don't worry, it's not just the nostalgia weeb doing this crap. Quick question for those of you in the audience, what's Lilith's orientation? Trick question, it's completely unknown. Points for trying to those of you who said Arrow Ace, but that didn't come from the show or even from Dana, it came from Lilith's voice actress on a charity stream giving her headcanon. And that was treated like actual tangible Arrow Ace representation. God, isn't the creative process so normal and fine? I mean, I get it, Dana. Writing an Arrow Ace character and confirming them in the show takes a whole 20 minutes of work, and you gotta wait 6 months before it goes live for everyone. Whereas if you make a passing reference in a live stream, you get to have the backpats and applause now. I mean, that's just good economics. It's the same logic by which you could write a book, but if you just talked about your 24 OCs on Tumblr, you could get all the praise and serotonin now. I mean, who's got time for work? There's egos to be okay, I'll stop now. If you're not seeing the problem here, turning the act of consumption into an event has a habit of sidestepping the art entirely. And my issue with fandom culture is one of completely and utterly sidestepping the art. A lot of people treat works of art like a simple sandbox for their fandom. This is why they don't have an issue with Twitter content, because it doesn't matter where it is, it's stuff. It's more stuff. You can put it on the wiki, and that's just as good. It's not about the story being told, it's about the action figures they get to play with, and the dynamics they get to absorb, and the story itself is often left behind. I mean, I don't even know why they bother with broadcast TV anymore. They could just go on Twitter and say, I will now stand here and imagine a story in my head, give us cash. This extends to characters in a very bad way. People will take a character, take a surface level reading of that character, and then project all their own issues onto that character, and act as if that was the execution all along. We used to call this OCs without the cringe of making OCs, where you like a character entirely for their design, take that design and write them a brand new one-dimensional personality in their place. But if I recall correctly, the technical term for that today is blorbo. I previously talked about this in regards to the way fandom prioritizes intent. When I initially started criticizing Steven Universe, a common refrain from fans was to reiterate the intentions of the show. I criticize it for the way it handles abusive family members, and they say, well, the show is all about forgiveness. I criticize the way the show overwhelmingly favors the perspectives of white characters and sidelines the others, and they say, well, that can't be. The intended message is one of inclusivity. I mean, look, in 2023, I know now that this was cope. Fandom clapping its hands over its ears and going la 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 la. But back then, I frequently made the correct remark that for all the show's intended messages, they were consistently getting lost in an ocean of anime tropes, poor writing, poor delegation, and the main creative brain behind the show being a Cadbury's Fruits and nutcase who has the talent of Doug Walker, the ego of Yandere Dev, and the politics of But I wouldn't go as far as to claim everyone who ever made this remark was coping and desperately trying to deny criticism, but there is definitely a merging of fandom headcanons into the actual canon with almost no awareness that this is going on. While I could sit here and list examples all day, there is one in particular that got me thinking about all of this, and that's Hunter. The biggest problem I've always had with Hunter is pretty simple. He ain't doing jack shit. Hunter has been a character of no ideas from day one. His design is woefully uninspired, his characterization is pulled entirely from stock tropes that have been seen 1,000 times the last year alone, and at present he often sucks up screen time that could have gone to characters who actually deserved it. And I wouldn't have a problem with any of this, except the last one, if he would actually do something when he shows up. Hunter's character has been passive from his first appearance, even when he had the trash boy Vanitas vibe going for him. He shows up, does nothing, refuses to elaborate, and leaves. It took him 5 episodes of being in the spotlight before he finally bailed on Belos, and that was largely because he had committed treason and couldn't go back. I don't know if Dana really gets how abused teenagers work. Like, while teenagers are often conditioned to think abuse is normal, it's usually in the vein of socially acceptable child abuse. You know, the casual degradation, the occasional slap, being treated like property over a person, and having to always bend to the ego of your parents. But the kind of abuse Hunter goes through isn't typical. It's akin to the abuse I went through, and I knew something was wrong immediately. My father only had to say the phrase, "You need me a hell of a lot more than I need you," once for me to realize that I was being abused. And I was 11 when that happened. That Hunter isn't consciously aware of this, even if he's too afraid to act, is extremely sketchy. It seems like Dana is writing an abused child, the way you might write an abused spouse. I know not every teenager is like that, but we're getting into the next problem because a cartoon isn't real life. Real life doesn't have an audience to be entertained, and the problem with this approach to Hunter is that it makes him into a passive character. Typically, passive characters aren't a good thing to give this kind of screen time to, because the majority of that time will be spent watching them hem and haw and drag their feet. This was the problem with Hollow Mind. It doesn't go through much information that's new to the viewer, and indeed the new information is kept in the background paintings, and that's because 90% of the episode is spent watching Hunter cope and seethe, which grinds the story to a halt. This has been seen in season 3 with Luce, where her trauma response has shifted from fight to freeze, and she wastes 2 entire episodes coping and seething. Previously, Luce would respond to trauma very proactively, fixing her mistakes and moving the story forward. At the end of Agony of a Witch, she breaks down and cries from Ida getting captured, but in the next episode, she pulls herself up and fixes it. In Through the Looking Glass Ruin, she starts to break down and cry over getting Amity fired before she sucks it up and says, "Nothing's going to work unless I make it work," and gets right to fixing the problem. This is good. Luce is being extremely proactive in the story and a highly positive character. I've hurt someone I care about, I need to fix it. But something changed in season 2B and season 3, and the main source of a lot of the problems seen in this period of the show is that Dana's idea of good storytelling is waiting. There are huge periods in season 2B and season 3 where the main characters will stand there and do fucking nothing while the episode ticks away. Almost like they had too much time instead of too little. Oftentimes this manifests in characters just not opening their fucking mouths and not talking to anyone. Luce is really bad with this. In season 2B, she completely and utterly stops communicating with people, keeps her mouth shut, lets things eat away at her and drive her to irrational decisions, whereupon she's caught lying, told gently but firmly to stop lying, and then does it all over again. She suddenly shifts to being very passive, curling up in a ball far away from the others and resolving to not do anything. And the problem with that is it means a lot of time is spent watching Luce sit there and do fucking nothing, and the story can't move until the writers decide to stop doing that, and you may as well fast forward through these scenes. And oftentimes they push it so far that if you're not somebody who criticizes the writer before the character, Luce actually comes off like an absolute bitch. By the time of For the Future, Luce has blatantly lied to her girlfriend's face 3 fucking times. There's a point at the end of Thanks to Them where after Luce has gotten a pep talk from her friends saying that she's not at fault for being tricked by Bellows, Amity makes her promise not to hide anymore, to stop lying to her. And she even says that Luce is very important to her and she wants her to remain in her life. Amity knows what Luce was about to do, and Luce says she understands. And then in For the Future, because the writers want to continue dragging this out until Luce's talisman hatches, she has her say not 5 minutes later that she still plans to stay in the human realm permanently. So she lied to her girlfriend, lied to her mother, lied to her snake sister, lied to the block of wood with a frowny face drawn on it, lied to everyone. And if I wasn't consciously aware of the shameless hackery on display here, I'd suggest that maybe Amity ought to find a new girlfriend. And no amount of claiming it's realistic is going to change that. It's not realistic. Luce has already demonstrated a realistic trauma response. This is a twisted version of someone's trauma response for the sake of cheap drama. The fact that Luce's talisman hatching coincides with her very sudden neck-snapping twist back to being the real Luce is evident of this. Despite it already coming to a very good conclusion, they wanted to hold it off for the big shocking moment because that's just what storytelling is now. Waiting. But some people projected their own trauma onto Luce, and even more have basically been so Pavlov by modern cartoons that they crave watching teenage girls get tortured into insanity, and so they declared it realistic without thinking about it, when all that's really happened is you've had to wait for Luce to come to the conclusion she should have come to 4 episodes ago. And Hunter is that problem tenfold. Most of the time when he's actually in an episode, the story grinds to a halt while Hunter sits there and does fucking nothing, and you may as well skip to Act 3 because the story's going to go the same way the last few of them went. The only interesting one of these is Eclipse Lake, because Hunter actually makes a different decision than he normally does, serves as a wedge in Amity's emotional state, and at least we get to watch her beat this nerd up and shove him in a locker. Huh, funny, in the episode he shares with Amity, Amity actually ends up splitting screen time with him instead of being completely and utterly shoved aside in favor of his arc. You know, unlike the other 4. Goodness, I wonder what could have possibly been different to make the writers not make this it's white favoritism, you already fucking know, and if you don't know, you're in denial. So the problem with Hunter is obvious, but also easily fixed. Personally, I would prefer deleting him from the story entirely, but I'll walk with you to this edgy, miserable pier. You can fix the problems with Hunter easily. Just make him more proactive. Make him do something. Anything. Hell, just swap out his angsty misery guts dialogue for self-protective witty barbs a la Chandler Bing. That would at least be fun. There's plenty of ways to write characters like Hunter, and fun stories tend to favor the more active, engaged responses to trauma. That did seem to be the way that they were going in the start of Hunting Talisman, where Hunter is intimidated into obedience by Bellows, but then the next time we see him, he's still an insufferable little shit. It would still be bullshit to sideline the non-white characters in favor of an angsty white boy, but at least it would be the least insufferable version of that bullshit. At least you get a funny little shit disturber in the process, and that's some gold. Well, silver. Well, copper. Copper's still good, you can wire stuff up with it. But whenever I offer that Hunter's character arc should have changed, I get inundated with the same copy-paste response. To hear Hunter Stan's talk, Hunter is a deeply traumatized character who serves as a barometer for the evils of Emperor Bellows. His importance to the story is to make it clear to the audience that Bellows is an evil piece of shit. I mean, look at him bullying this poor boy. I would like to remind people that if you want a barometer for Bellows' evil, petrifying wild witches and plotting actual literal genocide is probably a better barometer for evil than being a shitty uncle. There's pages of explanation about the deep nuances of Hunter's personality, and half the time it comes off like they're just making shit up, and the other half the time they're actually describing Luce. But I won't deny that Hunter does have a lot of potential. I literally just explored some of it, but that potential goes unrealized in the actual show. In the show, Hunter gets what little personality he had stripped away from him completely, spends multiple episodes hanging out in the foreground going, wait, am I the baddie? Before concluding that he is and rebelling and then resetting to do it all again. And once he's a full-fledged member of Team Lusura, what does he do? Hang out in the foreground, get in the way, swap places with Luce, make Amity recoil like she just touched acid, blackmail Luce for some inexplicable reason, and then get weirdly into Star Trek. Like, credit where it's due, they do try to put character traits onto Hunter, but it's mostly just fandom shit. Like, he wants to carve Talisman and he's weirdly into Star Trek. That's not a personality, honey. But it's all so bare bones and surface level that even his romance with Willow is shoved in at the last minute with skater boy logic. Hunter simultaneously takes up a lot of screen time, and the writers still can't be bothered actually doing anything with him. And if you've crafted a detailed 3-dimensional personality out of Hunter, more power to you, but that shouldn't stop you from criticizing the writers for not doing that. At this point, it's just shit or get off the pot. Either capitalize on all the threads you've left that all the 13-year-old girls have picked up on, or just put the character away and stop dragging him out to make us look at him. Look, I'll confess, I fucking hate the angsty white boy with baggage, okay? I've hated it for years. It is my least favorite character archetype. I am so tired of the way some broody white guy gets center stage just because, and then proceeds to twiddle his thumbs for the entire story. But that's a problem. Let's not mistake a mediocre character arc as a feature of a story, especially if it's going to take up an inordinate amount of production time and imposing on you every chance it gets. If it's gonna be such a focus, it should be a lot better. We've done this character arc 1,000 times. It's not like we haven't had time to refine this concept to a mirror shine. Shit or get off the pot. There's the argument that they can't do anything with Hunter because they got canceled due to pandemic budget cuts, but I don't buy that. Not only did they already have a good basis for the character and chose to throw it away, they ended up wasting a lot of that limited time. Much of Season 2B spins its wheels and refuses to move the story forward, almost like they were given too much time and didn't know what to do with it. If they really were affected by the pandemic cuts, they would have scaled down and made a lean, trim, fit story, but instead most of Season 2 decidedly contributes very little on the story or character front. No, I'm gonna go with the explanation that Ginger posited in the Season 2 podcast. Hunter was clearly a writer baby of Dana's, a character from early development that Dana was weirdly proud of and would not let go of. But it seems like she only got as far as the design and stopped right then and there and had no actual personality in mind for him. And the insistence on keeping him there meant that he was a burden every writer had to bear. Separate Tides was written by Zach Marcus, who characterized the Golden Guard as something of a little shit. But every other Hunter-centric episode, save Any Sport in a Storm, was written by Dana herself, and the sudden neck-snap shift in his personality very much feels like Marcus doing whatever felt appropriate, but Dana's episodes feel closer to the intended vision of the character. Even Any Sport in a Storm, written by John Bailey Owen, actually manages to add sillier elements to his character, and these scenes with Darius that are actually quite charming. So it's not like the other writers don't have ideas, but they are in strict conflict with the ideas of the executive producer. There's a lot to criticize here. There is a problem behind the scenes, and the problem is very evident. The executive producer does not want to let this character go, and the others have to write around that. I understand Hunter's fanbase sees a lot of potential in this character and are also extremely aggressive and whiny, but it cannot be disputed that potential goes completely and utterly unrealized. Even if you like Hunter, I'm sure you'd like him a lot more if he was just better. I'd prefer him to just be gone and for Willow to take his place as Tritagonist, but I would take him being better written as a close second. But it seems the audience is taking that potential's very existence as proof the character is written well. As if Dana made a Tumblr post saying, "Here's my OC's backstory," and we treat that like it's an entire book on its own. Except you didn't even get the backstory, you got the picture, and the backstory is in the reblog of some 15-year-old girl who went nuts at 3 a.m. and started typing. It just feels wrong on a fundamental level to get angry about criticism directed at Dana because of character work done by some Tumblr tots who are going decidedly uncredited. Maybe this is something I find confusing because I've already been on that side of the fandom in past. The Warcraft series had one character who has always been immensely popular, but who had a lot of her potential completely ignored by a writing team who was apathetic to her character at best and hostile to it at worst. But nobody who loves Sylvanas Windrunner for her potential as a character would ever spare Blizzard any criticism for how she was handled. This was a character who got the short end of the stick. A very odd writing decision given this was a character who got standing ovations when she appeared in cinematics. So it is weird that you would not treat a character like that with the respect they deserve. But it's not a fucking mystery. The reason this happened is because their most popular character was a woman and a sexual abuse survivor, and the writing team was largely composed of misogynists and sexual abusers. So they didn't capitalize on that character's potential because they just didn't care, and they hated her, and they wanted to uplift other characters in her place, which ultimately failed and backfired hard. Nobody would dare credit Blizzard for accidentally creating a character people liked, especially when their contempt of her routinely pissed off the vast majority of their player base. People love Sylvanas not because of Blizzard's writing, but in spite of it. Indeed, this spite-based appreciation forms the basis for a lot of characters people like. Sometimes it is pure bias. There are a lot, and I mean a lot, of Raylos in Hunter's fanbase who are obscenely racist, misogynistic, and homophobic, and I sure as fuck am not counting them in who I'm talking to today. Hunter is a magnet for fandom racism and misogyny, but today I'm talking past those people to the people with a very sincere love of the character. You don't love this character because of how he's written. You love this character in spite of how he's written, and you should be upset that his potential is routinely squandered in favor of just making more shots of him moping and sulking. You should expect better. Everyone would have better if the show did not waste time on this character doing fucking nothing. There should have been a lot more pressure on Dana early on to either shit or get off the pot with this fucking kid, to stop jerking people around and sidelining the other characters, to make this character someone who could have fit into the story much less intrusively. It's not like they can't do it. They did it, and thanks to them for the first fucking time. There's no reason they couldn't have done it anywhere else. Either get rid of the fucking guy or make him actually good. I am so tired of these half-written Riku rejects, and you should be tired of it as well. You should expect better. They knew going in that they didn't have time for this shit, and they still went and did it anyway. And you shouldn't hide behind potential to avoid accepting that. You should be shoving that potential in Dana's face going, why the fuck didn't you do any of this? You had the time. You had 6 episodes to do it. Why the fuck didn't you do any of this? I get loving a character based on their potential. Believe me. I get it. But that potential is largely being realized by fans, and the fans shouldn't have to do it. You shouldn't be required to flesh out these characters on your time. They should have been fleshed out in pre-production and ready to go. This is the TV version of players being expected to fix the bugs in an RPG because the developer couldn't be bothered. Fandom has been aggressively anti-criticism for a long time, and this focus on potential over execution is another way of ignoring and demonizing criticism, and it's not healthy. Wouldn't you like these things to be good? Wouldn't you like to not have to do most of the homework for these things? Maybe we ought to start treating characters like characters instead of blorbos.